So, according to my notes, we are on Canto 8, Chapter 12, Text 41. Is that correct?
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay, good, good. So, this chapter is entitled Mohini Murti, Incarnation Bewilders Lord Shiva. When Lord Shiva heard that the Supreme Lord had bewildered the demons as Mohini Murti, he wanted to see this most attractive form of the Supreme appearing as a woman. The Lord fulfilled his desire, and immediately Lord Shiva himself became captivated. Later, by the grace of the Supreme, Shiva again regained his composure. Therefore, no matter who we are, the attractive form of the opposite sex is potentially dangerous for spiritual life, and we need the help of the Lord. So, this is our chapter today, and this is our particular verse 8, 12, 41. Shri Shuka Uvacha Evam Bhagavata Rajan Shri Vatsanketa Satkrita Amritya Amantriya Tam Parikramya Sagana Swalayam Yayao Shri Shuka Uvacha Evam Bhagavata Rajan Shri Vatsankena Satkritaha Amantriya Tam Parikramya Sagana Svalaya Yayao. So the word for word here is Sri Shuka Uvacha, Sri Sukadev Goswami said, Evam, thus, Bhagavata, by the personality of Godhead, Rajan, O king, Srivatsa Ankena, who always carries the mark of Srivatsa on his breast, Satkritaha, being very much applauded, Amantya, taking permission from, Tam, him, Parikramya, circumambulating, Sagana, with his associates, Swalayam, to his own abode, Yayao, went back. The translation reads thus: Shukadev Goswami said, O king, having thus been praised by the Supreme Personality, who bears the mark of Srivatsa on his chest, Lord Shiva circumambulated him. Then, after taking permission from him, Lord Shiva returned to his abode Kailas along with his associates. So I'll read that a second time. Shukadev Goswami said, O king, having thus been praised by the Supreme Personality, who bears the mark of Srivatsa on his chest, Lord Shiva circumambulated him. Then, after taking permission from him, Lord Shiva returned to his abode Kailas along with his associates. And here we have the purport, which is not a very lengthy purport. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakur remarks that when Lord Shiva was offering obeisances unto Lord Vishnu arose and, am I reading the wrong verse? Just a second. Yeah, I'm reading the verse following. Let me back up here. Yes, somehow. No, no, this is right. Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur remarks that when Lord Shiva was offering obeisances unto Lord Vishnu arose and embraced him. Therefore, the word Sri Vatsankena is used here. The mark of Srivatsa adorns the chest of Lord Vishnu, and therefore, when Lord Vishnu embraced Lord Shiva while being circumambulated, the Srivatsa mark touched Lord Shiva's bosom. Sri Shuka Uvacha Evam Bhagavata Rajan Srivatsankena Satkritaha Amantriya Tang Parikramya Sagana Svalayam Yao. O King, having thus been praised by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who bears the mark of Srivatsa on his chest, Lord Shiva circumambulated him. Then, after taking permission from him, Lord Shiva returned to his abode, Kailas, along with his associates. Again, this verse is kind of at the end of this chapter, chapter 12, where basically the entire pastime has been played out at this point, and this is like the epilogue. It's just sort of tying together the loose ends that are left as a result of the end of this chapter. And this chapter also ties up the end of this entire huge section in Bhagavatam about the churning of the milk ocean, which starts way, way, way back at the early part of this canto and goes through many chapters. And finally, now we're at chapter 12. And so we had, the whole idea of the uh, demons taking over the heavenly planets away from the demigods, and then the demigods wanting to get them back, but because they'd offended, they weren't able to conquer the demons. And then we find that what happens is that there's a truce. The demigods and demons come together. They decide to churn the milk ocean for the nectar of immortality. Both think they're going to cheat the other out of it. At the end, when the many difficulties take place and finally the milk ocean is churned, then the demigods sit down, the demons sit down, but the demons actually have the nectar. And to take the nectar away from the demons, the Supreme Lord appears as Mohini Murti and bewilders the demons and allows all the demigods to drink the nectar, and the demons don't get any. Then after that, there's a battle that starts to ensue, and so on and so forth. And then we come to this section where, as a follow-on pastime, Lord Shiva hears about this whole episode that the Supreme Lord is actually um, uh, has actually bewildered the demons in the form of a woman. And so he's eager to actually see that form. And so he goes together with his wife and, a couple of ghosts and Halloween people and all those kind of fun things. He goes to see the Supreme Lord. And there he kind of asks the Supreme Lord that he would like to see this Mohini Murti form. And this is, you know, uh, kind of uh, him going out on a limb a bit here. So we see that one of the key elements of this section of Bhagavatam is this most important idea that sex attraction is the most potent force for degradation in this material world, that almost no one is immune from the pull of sex attraction. And therefore, whoever we are, wherever we are, whatever ashram we're in, whatever we're doing, we have to be constantly aware that sex attraction is there, and it seeks to destroy our composure. It seeks to destroy our spiritual focus. And it constantly um, becomes an issue that causes people to have all kinds of problems with themselves and with others. So this is why uh, there's the institution of marriage, and why in general in civilized societies, the idea is that one should have one wife, one husband, and live together, and not try to constantly search for new sex partners, which is the tendency of a human. Tendency of a human is not to be satisfied with one sex partner, but want to have more than one, and this goes for both men and women. Therefore, to curb that tendency, there's the institution of marriage. And so a man and a woman come together and they tie the knot. It's interesting that even in our modern Western society, it's called tying the knot, although really only in the Vedic ceremony does a knot actually get tied. So it's interesting. Any rate, the idea is that in this way, sex is integrated into a normal development of the spiritual progress and does not become a disturbance, a monumental disturbance to spiritual life. Through the process, because there is so much karma attached to illicit sex, through that karma, not only is the individual spiritual life ruined and preempted, but society is disturbed in many ways. Society requires some stability. And despite what modern people think, that basically one does not need to remain faithful to a single individual, so on and so forth. This is the kind of, at least modern thinking, and it's often put forward in various kinds of, philosophical and anecdotal ways, as stories in movies, on books, and so forth and so on. However, generally people are not happy with this arrangement. There is a sense of wanting to settle down with one individual, and therefore this is the natural way to do it. And when you settle down with one individual, then you are able to properly care for children, which are the natural product of a woman and a man coming together and having a marriage. Then the children are protected, they're cared for, and they have the same mother and the same father throughout their entire lives, which is becoming increasingly more rare, that a child goes through his entire childhood uh, seeing the same mother and same father in his life. Uh, because in modern society, people are so dedicated to their material happiness that to work together with someone who no longer provides material happiness to them, especially sex happiness, is unthinkable in our modern society. So therefore, marriages break up. Of course, they break up for a number of reasons. That's not always the thing that causes the marriage to break up, but it's certainly a factor that it's quite well known that when men and women come together, first, everything is exciting. Those happy little dopamines are wiggling around. Everybody's happy and satisfied and big smiles. But after some time, the dopamine hit starts to uh, relax, and we're no longer, as infatuated by the same individual as we once were. As we always know, that familiarity breeds contempt. So similarly, also familiarity kind of dulls the edge of that attraction between male and female. And that's why we have vows in marriage that even though now the attraction is not so intense, a living entity who is a part of Vedic culture, for that matter, most religious cultures, has the obligation to continue with the contractual agreement for the children's sake. And in earlier decades or even earlier centuries of our history, modern history, this was done. Now, generally, as soon as there is some loss of happiness, loss of sense gratification, some difficulty, some emotional disturbance, then immediately the marriage breaks up and the children are shared or sometimes not between two groups of parents, and this may happen multiple times. And in this way, so much time is wasted, so much grief is experienced, so much agitation is there. And that's why uh, the Vedas and basically all religions have this idea that sex life needs to be uh, restricted or regulated. And of course, in the Vedic literature, we have in the fifth canto, Pum Sanstriya Mituni Bhavam Etam Tayor Mito Hridayam Grantam Ahu Ho Brihakshetra Sutapta Vitar Janasya Moho Yamaham Mameti. Attraction between male and female is the basic principle of material existence. On the basis of this misconception, which ties together the hearts of the male and female, one becomes attracted to body, home, property, children, relatives, and wealth. In this way, one increases life's illusions and thinks in terms of I and mine. So there is in modern thinking this notion that somehow or other sex attraction and the romantic bond between a man and a woman is something divine or something eternal or something that causes upliftment. However, we see that in the Vedas it is not it's not described that way. It's described as an illusion. Of course, uh, this illusion is based on the body because we are spirit souls. We're not the body. Uh, we are not the male body. We are not the female body. And therefore, the attraction is based on an external car that we're driving. It's like two people falling in love with one another because they like each other's cars. I suppose this has probably happened in the modern world, but at any rate, uh, the idea that we are the external body is so strong, and it becomes cemented even more powerfully when we become attracted to another external body. And any rate, through the process of marriage and through legitimizing the coming together of the male and female, so many responsibilities become incumbent on both the male and the female. And therefore, so many responsibilities, so many new activities have to be performed. And this is, of course, difficult. And so the Vedic scheme of things is that one does this for some period of time. The children grow up and leave the nest, go out in the world, and then the husband and wife gradually detach and try to turn the clock backwards towards before they were encumbered by so many family obligations. So in this particular case, Lord Shiva uh, wanted to understand what this Muhini Murti must have looked like. What was it like? And Prabhupada explains in the purports that when Mohini Murti appeared, the demons were instantly enraptured by Mohini Murti, but the demigods were not. So this is what these chapters have been telling us, that the demigods understood that this was the Supreme Lord, and so they were peaceful. However, the demons immediately began to compete for the favor of Mohini Murti, and as a result, they lost their chance to drink the immortal nectar, because Mohini Murti was there just particularly for the purpose of swindling them. Now, Prabhupada mentions in some of the purports that Lord Shiva imagined that since he's a demigod, in fact, he's one of the two very primary demigods. We usually hear about Lord Brahma and we hear about Lord Shiva as being very special demigods. They have more power and more importance than the other demigods. Lord Brahma, because he's the first demigod, and he's the one who begins the process of creation of the universe. And of course, he is the guna avatar of the mode of goodness. I mean, the mode of passion, rather, I'm sorry. And Lord Shiva, on the other hand, he's also a guna avatar of the mode of ignorance, and he's there when the universe needs to be disassembled. And he is said to be the master of the material world. And his wife, Parvati, is the mistress of the material world. She is Maya personified. So Prabhupada tells us in this particular episode that when Lord Shiva was shamelessly trying to catch Mohini Murti, uh, his wife Parvati was not disturbed, because she was actually the illusory potency that was attracting her husband, even though he was being even though he was in pursuit of Lord Vishnu. Of course, we see that this goes on, and then Lord Shiva passes Semen, and at that point, the whole chase stops, and Lord Shiva comes to his senses. And he's not embarrassed, because he understands that he was attracted by the Supreme, even though the Supreme was in the form of a woman. He is actually happy by that. And, the Supreme kind of hinted to Lord Shiva, you sure you want to see this form? Because, you may think that you're above and beyond this, but actually you may not be so much above and beyond it. In fact, he was not. So in this way, the Supreme Lord, as Vishnu, humbled Lord Shiva a bit. And Lord Shiva was pleased that he was humbled. He wasn't humiliated by it. And he got the chance to see this form. Uh, it was kind of Lord Shiva didn't want to miss that part of the movie. He came in late. He wasn't there when the demons and the demigods were seeing Mohini Murti. I'm not sure exactly why, because he's a demigod. So I don't know where he was at that moment in time, but he didn't see Mohini Murti. So now he wanted to see Mohini Murti. He did. He was attracted, and he shamelessly ran after Mohini Murti like a lusty man trying to satisfy himself. And then he was, you know, unable to, well, he captured Mohini Murti, but she uh, uh, wiggled free from his grasp, and eventually he came to his senses. And then he offered prayers. Well, he offered prayers before and he offered prayers after. So in both cases, Lord Shiva is offering prayers to the Supreme Lord. Now, this verse is also a very key verse about understanding sex life from the perspective of the Vedas. Yan maitunani griha medi sukham hitucham kandu yanena kavayor eva dukkha dukkam tripyanti neha kripana bahu dukkha bhajaha kanduti van manasim vishaheta dhiraha. Sex life is compared to the rubbing of two hands to relieve an itch. Grihamedis, so-called grihastas, who have no spiritual knowledge, think that this itching is the greatest platform of happiness, although actually it is a source of distress. The Kripanas, the fools who are just the opposite of the Brahmanas, are not satisfied by repeated sensuous enjoyment. Those who are Dhira, however, who are sober and who tolerate this itching, are not subjected to the sufferings of fools and rascals. And this is the prayers of Prahlad, uh, of Sri Prahlad, who is speaking to Nrsingadev when he is drastically angry after having killed Prahlad's father, Hiranyakashipu. So the demigods were afraid to approach Nrsingadev. They put forward little Prahlad, and Prahlad was not at all intimidated by this horrible form of Nrsingadev, having eviscerated Hiranyakashipu, and then later uh, many of Hiranyakashipu's family and servants, etc., and soldiers. So this little boy, unintimidated by the drastic and fierce appearance of Lord Nrsingadev, starts offering him prayers, and this is one of the prayers. And this kind of sums it up. I think this particular verse here is a verse that is like complete blasphemy for modern consciousness, the way modern people think about things. Uh, in the modern world, people think of sex life as something almost sacred, something that you must do somehow or other, or there's something seriously wrong. And so here, sex life is given the kind of pedestrian analogy of being like rubbing together two hands to scratch an itch. And yes, the idea of sex desire is kind of like an itching. And when it's scratched, it goes away slightly for a little while and comes right back. But if one is engaged in spiritual life, and feeling the happiness and fulfillment of spiritual life, this sex attraction becomes not an insurmountable object. And that's why some can uh, tolerate the itching. Of course, if one is unable to tolerate, then one should get themselves married and live together with one wife or one husband, whichever way it is. For the Vedas, generally speaking, the Vedas describe spiritual life from the perspective of the male. But as Prabhupada said, for ladies, they just have to reverse this. Whenever they see women, they substitute the word man. So it's exactly the same thing. It's just flipped around, and women are also um, stripped of their spiritual progress by their association with men, just as men are stripped of their association of their progress in spiritual life by the association of women, unless that association is done according to the Grihastha ashram. If that's the case, then things can go along and both can make spiritual progress. And eventually they come to the stage where the children are gone and they continue spiritual life, but now free from all the myriad of obligations that they had when the children were young, when the house was just being set up, when both were trying to figure out their occupations, et cetera, et cetera. So all that's behind them now. So this verse um, finalizes or concludes this pastime of Lord Shiva being somewhat embarrassed by the Supreme, although Lord Shiva himself was not embarrassed. Uh, and of this entire pastime of the demigods and the demons cooperating together to churn the ocean of milk and achieve the nectar of immortality. Any questions or comments by any of our illustrious viewers, either at the Bhakti Center or on Zoom somewhere?
My
Yeah.
Okay.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
I see Ananda Bihari who is unmuted. I didn't know if he had a question too.
Go ahead.
You're saying I should go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question because actually I was speaking to Gaur Sharad about this. It was actually his question, and then it became my question. How is it that
Whose question?
Gaur Sharad Prabhu?
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So we were wondering, how is it that the demigods were not bewildered by Mohini Murti, yet Shiva, who seems to be more spiritually qualified, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yet he was bewildered. How did that work?
Well, I was reading through this chapter, you know, about an hour ago. And as I was reading through it, Prabhupada explains in the purport that generally speaking, the demigods are self-controlled, and so Shiva is as well. But it mentions the fact that Shiva is specifically asking to see this Mohini Murti. And the Supreme Lord thought, so Shiva thinks he's beyond sex attraction. He's just assuming that. So let me see if I can create a form that will bewilder even Lord Shiva. So this is how it's portrayed if you look a little bit earlier in this chapter. And that's why Lord Shiva was, he got a special dose, an extra version, the deluxe model. So the, in this way, the Supreme Lord wanted to humble Shiva a little bit, but Shiva is very humble anyway, so there wasn't much to accomplish there. However, at the same time, this pastime is there just to kind of strike a big billboard sign that says, whoever you are, whatever you think you have achieved, don't think that sex couldn't ruin you in a minute, and so I think that's one of the main takeaways or main purposes of this pastime.
And also, you said that actually, can you elaborate on the connection between Parvati and Mohini Murti? Yeah.
Well, there's not much to say about it. In the purports, Prabhupada says that Parvati is the material energy. So she was bewildering Lord Shiva, but she is the energy of the Supreme when he creates Maya. So she's bewildering her own husband in some way. Exactly the details of how that works, I can't explain it, but we know that the Supreme Lord is the source of everything. And in the material world, Shiva and Parvati are understood to be the master and mistress of the material world. Parvati is the material energy, Maya, and she has throwing and covering potency, uh, the Avaranatmika and Prakshapatmika potencies, and she bewilders the living entity. Whereas Shiva, he is, as far as I understand it, kind of in charge of the material elements to some extent. And when it comes time for the material elements to disassociate, he's the one who plays on his din din drum, does his dance, and the entire material universe starts to discombobulate. So that's kind of what I can say about that. And I just reiterating what I read in the purports about how somehow or other Shiva was attracted by Vishnu in his Mohini Murti form. He was attracted by the illusion, and that illusion was identical with his wife Parvati.
Yeah, and so it was because Lord Shiva thought that he was self-controlled enough to be able to see Mohini Murti that Krishna decided to kind of smash his pride.
Right, right. Krishna turned up the amps, so
Uh-huh.
he and don't think he wouldn't do that to any one of us, So pride goeth before fall. Whenever you think that you are kind of beyond sex, it's kind of like watch out. What will happen next will demonstrate to you that you're not. If
Okay, thank
you're
you.
sincere about spiritual life and focused on chanting and focused on spiritual progress, then in general, sex life will not be an issue. It's just that we should never think that we have come to the stage where it could not be an issue. So, as we say, avoid the near occasion of sin. Don't do things which put you at risk.
But if a devotee falls prey to illicit sex life, you said that his spiritual life is finished. But we also hear that not that you should sin on the strength of chanting, but we hear that you just keep chanting, and you'll be rectified. So it seems like if a person does fall prey, that his spiritual life doesn't have to be finished. He just has to go on chanting, isn't it?
Yeah, I was using the word finished in a more metaphoric sense, not in a sense of that's the end. It just means that sex life has the ability to really, militate against spiritual life in a significant way. So always the only recourse in any situation, if you're doing well, you're doing badly, you're becoming disturbed, you're becoming distracted, you fall down, whatever it is, there's only one thing to do, and that's keep going forward. And eventually you will be able to overcome Maya. So Daivihi Esha Gunamaya Mama Maya Duratya Mama Valye Prapajante Tamsataivi Vajamya. That the material energy is Krishna's energy. It's very difficult to overcome, but by surrendering to Krishna, it's Krishna that eventually overcomes the material energy and makes it docile enough that we can walk over this sea of possible huge problems without falling into any of them. So it's Krishna's mercy. If we're serving, then it should be fairly easy to do. Let me see if any others have a question out there somewhere.
Krishna Maharaj.
Tackle one more. Yeah.
So Lord Shiva is bewildered by both and acts out really with both the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his wife, and comes to his senses and can understand that he's fallen into illusion, but doesn't seem to ask forgiveness or anything. And I understand in this case that's really just a formality because he comes to his senses and realizes what's happening. So forgiveness might be just a formality in this case. But yeah, I was observing that and was just wondering what.
Yeah. I don't know if Shiva really has anything to be forgiven about. He wanted to see Mohini Murti, and I guess it was some kind of curiosity. We should always be careful what we ask from the Supreme Lord, because there's a lot of these kind of strange situations where a devotee asks for something that's kind of off target a bit, and as a result, something bizarre happens, in a similar fashion, what is it? There's this Muni, Markandeya Rishi, I think it is, who asks to understand the Lord's um, illusory potency. And he goes through a whole episode too in a very similar way. The Lord says, you sure you really want to do this?" And so because he's asked, the Supreme Lord complies. But then, you know, the next thing that happens is a lot of unfortunate things. He, floats in the waters of devastation for millions of years, and all this kind of really kind of weird stuff happens. So Lord Shiva, you know, uh, he understood that he was attracted by the Supreme. It wasn't an ordinary woman, so he didn't feel that he transgressed anything. And even his wife didn't seem offended by the whole thing because she knew that it was the Supreme, and she was, in one way, a participant in the whole thing. So, you know, uh, in this way, I don't know if he had anything to really be apologizing for. It was kind of a funny pastime in one sense, but at the same time, it had an important moral, that whoever we are, even if we're Lord Shiva. And Lord Shiva is considered to be the most Dhira. There's a pastime where the demigods want Lord Shiva to have a son to save them. And Lord Shiva's in meditation and he won't come out of meditation. And his wife Parvati is even massaging his genital, and that doesn't bring him out of meditation. So you can see that this is a serious statement that if Lord Shiva can be um, brought out of his equanimity and pointed towards sex life, who of us has any hope unless we are simply uh, under the care and protection of the Supreme Lord?
Thank you, Marsh.
Okay, so I thank you all very much for your comments and for the interaction on this class. And we're at 8 o'clock, so I know that you all will start your puja here in a few minutes. So thank you all very much. All glories to Shrimad Bhagavatam, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.